3 of syllabus is ecosystem. Let us first understand what is an ecosystem. If we break this word, eco implies environment, system is an interacting, interdependent complex. Thus, it includes organic complex and physical factors. A.G. Tansley in 1935 defined ecosystem as the system resulting from the interaction of all the living and non-living factors of the environment. Living factors are always interacting with the non-living factors such as sunlight, then various gases that are present in the environment. So, a system which results from this interaction is referred to as an ecosystem. Hence, it is considered as a unit of interaction of living organisms and non-living environment. Earth is considered as a giant ecosystem, and in order to study for our convenience, it is divided into various smaller ecosystems such as forests, desert, marine, marine ecosystem, grassland ecosystem, croplands, etc. These unique ecosystems are separated in space and time. Forest may be located in some other place, while oceans are far away from the forests. Thus, the ecosystems are separated in space and time, but functionally they are integrated as a whole. For example, plants and also animals respire. During this process, exchange of gases takes place. Therefore, gases are added to the atmosphere. Transpiration by plants adds moisture to the atmosphere. Water from rivers meet oceans, and during this, various biological communities and inorganic elements are transferred to the sea or transported to the sea. You must have heard of migration of fish. Salmon migration is very famous, wherein this fish migrates from oceans into the rivers for breeding. Thus, the ecosystems functionally they are integrated. Also, when soil is formed by weathering of rocks, several agencies of environment like wind and water they transport the microbial community which is associated with the soil from one place to other. Thus, functionally, we cannot separate these ecosystems. But in space and time, that is, their locations are definitely different. Ecosystem is usually an open system. It should be capable of transformation, accumulation, and circulation of energy. Energy, in living organisms is in the form of ATP. So, when one organism feeds on other, this energy transfers from one organism to other. So, plants, when they fix sunlight, it is converted into chemical energy with the help of chlorophyll, and several compounds are formed. So, the ecosystem should be capable of transformation, accumulation, and circulation of energy. We can say it is highest level of ecological interaction, which is energy based, and it can be as small as a pond and large as a ocean. Let us first look at what do you mean by the structure and function of an ecosystem. So, when I say structure of an ecosystem, it means composition of biological community. Biological community means different species of plants, animals, microorganisms that may be present. Second, quantity and distribution of non-living materials. Non-living materials are the inorganic elements. Their quantity and distribution means in what amount these elements are present in the ecosystem and how they are distributed. That is, from the surface of the ground to a certain depth, what is the amount that is present. Then, if it is a given region, in what areas they are concentrated. So, that is quantity and distribution of non-living materials. And third, range of conditions of existence. Conditions of existence means the different light conditions, then temperature, then rainfall, pressure conditions. So all that means the structure of an ecosystem. So whenever we talk about structure of an ecosystem, these three components should be kept in mind. First, composition of biological community. Second, quantity and distribution of non-living materials. And third, range of conditions of existence. You all know that in temperate climates, since the temperatures are low, the animals that are living there, they have certain adaptations. They have an increased fat content, fur on their body. So definitely the conditions, the physical conditions that are present, they are going to influence the existence of different biological communities. Then when we speak of function of an ecosystem, in the previous slide I told you that ecosystems are separated in space and time, but functionally they are integrated as a whole. That means there is biological energy flow between them. Now, energy in living organisms is mainly in the form of ATP. You must have heard this molecule, adenosine triphosphate. Plants use sunlight to produce carbohydrates. When any organism feeds on plants, that energy which is stored in plants is transferred to it. And as and when one organism feeds other, this energy is transmitted and finally returned back to the environment when the organism dies. So this is the function of an ecosystem, the rate of biological energy flow. Structure of an ecosystem. An ecosystem comprises mainly of two components. First component is abiotic component and the second is biotic component. Abiotic component are the non-living factors of the environment, whereas biotic component comprises of the living organisms such as plants, animals, microbes. Abiotic component means the sun, the wind, different inorganic elements that are present in the soil and also in the gaseous form in the atmosphere. Biotic component is further categorized as autotrophs and heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are further categorized as macro consumers and micro consumers. So let us first look at the abiotic component of the ecosystem. So again, the first and foremost, the abiotic component includes inorganic substances, various elements like phosphorus, sulfur, then carbon, nitrogen, those that are involved in material cycles. Material cycles, you all know there are carbon cycle, phosphorus cycle, sulfur cycle. Then organic elements like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and their compounds. Some elements which may be present in trace amounts like cobalt, then magnesium, selenium, zinc, all of these are the abiotic component of the environment. Now, the amount of these inorganic substances present at any given time in the ecosystem is referred to as standing state. One should also know the distribution of these inorganic substances. By distribution, I mean a according to the depth as well as at different points in an ecosystem. Some elements may be abundant in the surface layer, while some may be present in trace amounts or very less amount. So, the distribution of these elements is also important, and that decides the different species that can be found. Then the climate of a given region, that is, the temperature, pressure, rainfall, and other factors. The climate of a given region, it depends upon the amount of sunlight received. This is a very good illustration wherein you can see here the region which is near the equator is receiving direct sunlight. So the temperatures are high. High temperature, greater rate of evaporation. More evaporation, more rainfall. So the regions here, the climate is mostly hot and humid. And essentially, the climate influences the type of biotic community that is found. So you will get here equatorial and sub-equatorial forests. Then at the subtropics, that is up to 23rd or 30 degrees north south, comparatively, the temperature is lower than that of the equator. Why? Because the sun's rays reach this area at an inclined angle. Therefore, the temperature is low. So the subtropical region, it receives less amount of sunlight compared to equator, and therefore it has a different climate, or which is comparatively cooler than that of the equator. So you get different biological communities at the subtropics. And as we move to higher latitudes, that is to 60 degrees north and south, we come across temperate zone, which is again a cooler region. Then at the poles, there is frigid zone. Frigid means the polar zone here. So the climate also varies according to the latitude, and the climate is going to influence the type of biological community that will be found at various regions. So the abiotic factors, they are going to influence the biotic factors, and form their interaction will result in the formation of an ecosystem. Now let us look at the biotic component, or the living component of ecosystem. Previously, I have shown you this chart where the ecosystem is divided into two main components, a biotic component and a biotic component. So we have discussed about the abiotic component. And let us discuss the biotic component, which is the living component. Now the first category is autotrophic component. Auto means self, trophos means related to nutrition. Therefore, organisms that are capable of producing their own food are called as autotrophs. Organisms that are capable of producing their own food are called as autotrophs. Let us first look at the characteristics of autotrophic component. It is concerned with fixation of light energy. Then it uses simple inorganic substances to build complex substances. It is dominated by plants and photosynthetic bacteria, just blue-green alga, cyanobacteria. Okay, organisms are known as producers. So what we have seen that the organisms which are capable of producing their own food are known as autotrophs. They are involved in fixation of light energy. They use simple inorganic substances to build complex substances. It is dominated by plants and photosynthetic bacteria. Which are the photosynthetic bacteria? Blue-green alga or cyanobacteria. Since they are producing the food for the ecosystem, they are known as producers. You all know photosynthesis, isn't it? Green plants, they use carbon dioxide and water in presence of sunlight and convert that to synthesize or convert the carbon dioxide and water into carbohydrates. And in this process, oxygen is liberated in the atmosphere. This happens because green plants have a pigment called chlorophyll. But the main uh, point here is that the sun's energy, which is light energy, is fixed, it is transformed and also stored, isn't it? So light energy is converted into chemical energy and it is also stored in the form of complex organic substances. Now, this happens on the surface of the earth. What about deep oceans? In deep oceans, there are chemosynthetic bacteria. These chemosynthetic bacteria oxidize inorganic molecules like methane, hydrogen sulfide, iron, ammonia to produce organic compounds. This happens in the absence of light because you know in the deep oceans light cannot reach. So this is known as chemosynthesis because they are using chemicals to produce their foods. So chemosynthesis or the photosynthesis, both of them can be considered as the producers. So that forms the autotrophic component of the ecosystem. Okay. Then, see, this is a very good illustration where you can see the sunlight is used by the plant in the leaf. It takes in carbon dioxide and water, and with the help of the pigment chlorophyll, it converts light energy into chemical energy and stores it in the form of carbohydrates. And in this process, oxygen is given out. So this is a very good example of how abiotic factors of the environment interact with the biotic factors. You can see here. So that interaction is basically the ecosystem, forms the basis of the ecosystem. Then, yes, these are few pictures of producers in different ecosystems. The first one, they are the green plants, which are the dominant producers. Then these are the blue-green alga and also some algae, which are the producers in different ecosystems. Then let us come to the heterotrophic component. Okay, I'll just play the chart again. See, ecosystem comprises of two components, abiotic components and biotic components. We have discussed about the abiotic components. We are now discussing the biotic component. Biotic component, again, the autotrophs, that means the organisms which are capable of producing their own foods. We have discussed them. Now we'll be discussing heterotrophs. Okay. Heterotrophic component. Let us first try to understand what is the meaning of heterotrophic. Hetero means other and trophos against is nutrition. So heterotrophic organisms, they are dependent on other organisms for food. What is the characteristic of this component? Utilization, rearrangement, and decomposition of complex materials. Where are these complex materials? See here. Carbohydrates were produced in photosynthesis. Now there will be some animals which will feed on this plant. So already complex substances are present in the plant in the form of carbohydrates. These will be utilized by the other organisms. Then in their body, they will undergo rearrangement. That means from carbohydrates, they will complex carbohydrates, they will be simpler carbohydrates, so glucose will be formed. All that process will take place. So they will undergo rearrangement. And finally, decomposition. That means when the organisms die, there will be some other organisms which will feed on the dead organisms. So heterotrophs are concerned with utilization, rearrangement, and decomposition of complex materials. They are also known as consumers because they consume the food which is already been prepared by the plants. Again, in the chart, we differentiated heterotrophs into macro consumers and micro consumers. Okay. Macro means large. Okay, so these are essentially larger in size and they are responsible for directly ingesting or eating other plants or animals. Okay, what did I say? Macro consumers are larger in size and they are responsible for or they directly ingest or eat other animals or plants. Another name for macro consumers is phagotrophs. Macro consumers again are differentiated into three categories. The first ones are herbivores. They are also known as primary consumers. Now, why they are known as herbivores? Because they feed on plants. And since they are first to consume or feed on the food material that has been prepared, they are known as primary consumers. Then secondary consumers. Secondary consumers will feed on primary consumers or herbivores. Tertiary consumers, they will feed on secondary consumers. And tertiary consumers are known as top carnivores. So, for example, if there is a plant, then there are insects which feed on the leaves of the plant. Okay. Then there are certain herbivores which feed on the fruits and the shoots of the plants. You must have seen rabbits feeding on the grass. So all these are known as herbivores or primary consumers. Deer is also a primary consumer. Then secondary consumers. Secondary consumers, they feed on primary consumers. For example, snake, then wolves. All of these, they are the secondary consumers which feed on the herbivores. Then the tertiary consumers or the top carnivores, these are tiger, lion, also eagle in few ecosystems. So one organism feeding other forms a trophic level or a nutrition level. Okay? And based on their food, they are distinguished as herbivores, then secondary consumers and tertiary consumers. So that was all about the macro consumers. So let us come back to the chart. Ecosystem. First, we have discussed the abiotic component. Then we are discussing now the biotic component. In biotic component, there are autotrophs and heterotrophs. Autotrophs are the organisms which are capable of producing or synthesizing their own food. Biotic component, second category is heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are dependent on other organisms for their food. So again, heterotrophs are distinguished into macro consumers and micro consumers. We have discussed the macro consumers. Let us now look at the micro consumers. Yes. Now, micro consumers, this name is because first they are of small size. Okay? They are essentially the bacteria, mostly bacteria and fungi, which forms this community. Now, they are also known as decomposers. Why decomposers? Because when the macro consumers die, okay, after a certain time interval, they are going to die in the environment. In that case, who will decompose them? The decomposers or the micro consumers. They are responsible. So, what is the characteristic of micro consumers? Micro consumers are responsible for breaking down the complex organic substances into simple inorganic elements. Complex organic substances will be present in the bodies of the dead animals. Complex organic substances will be carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Now, Micro-consumers will act upon these complex organic substances and will break down them into simple inorganic elements like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, then nitrogen also, and so other elements, phosphorus. So the complex substances converted into simple substances and made available again to the plants so that they can absorb these elements from the soil. Okay, so in the first lecture itself, I told you nature is a very good example of sustainability. It recycles everything, nothing goes waste. So the decomposition part is done by micro consumers. Okay, now how this happens? Let us first discuss about fungi. The mode of nutrition in fungi is saprotrophic nutrition. Okay? Please note down the word saprotrophs. Saprophytic. Saprophytic nutrition. So here what happens, fungus secretes certain enzymes outside its body. Okay, now fungus, you know, it grows on certain substratum. It may be wood uh, or soil. So in that case, it secretes certain enzymes out of its body. You know, fungus have those filamentous elements which are branching. Those are known as hyphae. So from them, the enzymes or digestive enzymes, we can call them, are given out in the environment. These enzymes break down the complex organic substances. Okay? If it is a dead leaf, so whatever the complex organic substance is present in that leaf will be broken down. If it is a wood on which the fungus is, suppose there's a bark which is there, which is fallen, and it is detached from the tree. If the fungus is growing on that, then the enzymes are secreted outside the body, and whatever complex organic substances are present in that are dissolved and converted into simple inorganic substances. So a solution is formed just near the body of the fungus. This solution comprises of the simple inorganic compounds which can be easily absorbed in the body of the fungus or through the body wall of the fungus. So this is known as saprophytic nutrition, and fungus does this because it wants food, but at the same time it is helping to convert the complex organic substance into simple inorganic elements. Now, whatever is being left can be added to the soil and return back into the environment. Again, that can be used by the plants for their growth. So, micro consumers, they have a very important role in the ecosystem. Then the next, you might have heard of earthworm. Earthworm is said to be the friend of the farmer. Rightly, it is very rightly said to be the friend of the farmer. Why? Because it feeds on dead vegetable matter. It feeds on dead vegetable matter, and it also engulfs. You understand? Engulfing means it is a voracious feeder. It will take in soil inside its body. Okay, and whatever complex organic substances are present in the soil will be decomposed by it. Then it consumes the dead vegetable matter, and inside its body it undergoes the chemical change as a part of its digestion. Then the earthworm cast or excreta of the earthworm, it contains minerals like phosphorus, magnesium, potassium, iron, nitrates, and whatnot. Okay, so the dead vegetable matter, which had complex organic substances, is converted into simple inorganic elements. Now, these, like, NPK fertilizers like potassium, nitrogen, okay, phosphorus, they are very important for the growth of plant. And this is how the earthworm helps in enriching the fertility of the soil. Hence, it is rightly called as the friend of the farm. Okay. Then bacteria, the same digestion process which occurs in fungus, same as in bacteria, that they secrete certain enzymes out of their body, or they have extracellular digestion, and they absorb that readily digested food from the environment. So these three fungi, bacteria, and earthworm, they are known as decomposers because they liberate nutrients in the free form in the soil. Okay. Now let us again look at the chart. So ecosystem, structure of an ecosystem. Ecosystem comprises of two components, major components, abiotic component and the biotic component. Abiotic component mean the non-living factors of the environment. These are some of the inorganic and organic elements, and also the physical factors like sun, wind, pressure, temperature that define the climate of the region. Then the second major factor is the major component is the biotic component. Biotic component is categorized into two major types. First are the autotrophs, second are the heterotrophs. Autotrophs are the organisms which are capable of synthesizing their own food. Okay, so what is the characteristic of autotrophs? Fixation of light energy, use of simple inorganic substances to build complex substances. Green plants are mostly considered as the autotrophs or the producers, but chemosynthetic bacteria are also autotrophs. Chemosynthesis occurs in deep oceans where chemosynthetic bacteria, they take in simple inorganic compounds and convert it into their food. Okay? So these are the autotrophs or the autotrophic component. And the second is the heterotrophs. Heterotrophs mean, or the one, heteros means other and trophos is nutrition. So the organism which feeds on other organism is known as a heterotrophs. What are the characteristics of heterotrophs? They are responsible for utilization, rearrangement, and decomposition of complex materials. What is the another name for heterotrophs? Consumers. Consumers again are classified as macro consumers and micro consumers. Macro consumers because they are larger in size and they directly ingest other organisms. Then those which feed on plants are known as herbivores. Examples of herbivores, insects, rabbit, deer, all of these, they are the herbivores feeding on the plants. Then second are the secondary consumers. Secondary consumers, they will feed on primary consumers or herbivores. Examples of secondary consumers, wolves, snake, all of these are the secondary consumers. Then third, tertiary consumers. Tertiary consumers will feed on secondary consumers. So secondary consumers, the examples are tiger, lion, eagle. These will be the tertiary consumers. Now always remember the animals which comprise these three categories, the classification is not rigid. That means any animal which functions as a secondary consumer might be a tertiary consumer in some other ecosystem. So the in general I've given you the examples. This distinction of different organisms is not rigid. Okay? But definitely those feeding on the plants are referred to as herbivores or the primary consumers. Okay? Then we saw micro consumers. They are called as micro consumers because they, first of all, they are small in size and they are responsible for converting the complex organic substances into simple inorganic elements which can be easily absorbed into the body. So fungi, they have saprophytic nutrition wherein the digestive enzymes are secreted outside the body of the fungus and the complex substances are converted or broken down into simple substances and simple substances are then absorbed through the body wall. Okay? And earthworm, it eats the soil or engulfs the soil, also dead vegetable matter, and its excreta or earthworm cast, they contain different elements or the nutrients required for the growth of the plants. Therefore, it is rightly called as the friend of the farm. Yes, this is a very good illustration showing the different organisms. So you can see here the autotrophs, which are the plants, then the herbivores, this is the beetle, squirrel, certain birds, then these are primary consumers, then these are the secondary consumers, snake, and the tertiary consumers. So these may be different in different ecosystem, particularly the secondary consumers and tertiary consumers. The distinction is not rigid. One animal will function as a secondary consumer in one ecosystem, it might be a tertiary consumer in another ecosystem. So this can happen. But herbivores are those which feed on the plants. And then we have the detrivores or the decomposers. Earthworm, fungus, and the millipedes. You all know millipedes, arthropods, they are also the decomposers.